They told you to love with all your heart, to be soft, to be endlessly patient, to give without keeping score. Because if you're kind enough, gentle enough, maybe the world won't hurt you. But Machiavelli never believed in that illusion. He didn't see love as salvation. He saw it as a crack in the armor, a weakness disguised as virtue, blind spot in your strategy, tiny opening just wide enough for betrayal to slip through like a shadow in the night. Because when you lead with emotion, you silence logic. You move from the heart and ignore the signals in your mind. And anyone who understands that imbalance can turn your love into a weapon against you. Machiavelli understood this fundamental truth. A man who depends on love to shield him will eventually be destroyed by it. Not because love itself is wicked, but because love doesn't calculate, and the world always does. You love your family, your friends, your woman. You speak openly, bare your soul, reveal every weakness. You forgive before understanding. You think, if I could never hurt them, surely they would never hurt me. But that's not the voice of a man. It's the innocence of a child, clinging to a belief that the world is fair. And Machiavelli, if he were watching you now, wouldn't mock you. He'd simply nod, not out of pity, not with pride, but with the quiet recognition of someone who has stood in your shoes. Before learning one painful, irreversible truth, the deepest wounds don't come from enemies. They come from those you let in too close. It's not hatred that breeds betrayal, it's comfort. It's familiarity that dulls their respect. It's unrestricted access that kills their gratitude. And it's your unwavering patience that turns you into a tool. It's not always out of cruelty, but often out of nothing more than human nature. We exploit what's freely given. It's not just selfishness. Sometimes it's just the way we're wired. We stop valuing what we never had to earn. And that's why change is not only necessary, it's urgent. Becoming cold-blooded doesn't mean shutting your heart off. It doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you love with structure, with boundaries, with strength. You love with your eyes open. You love with standards, not surrender. You don't beg to be loved. You hold the reins, because love without limits isn't intimacy. It's exposure, and exposure invites risk. If you've ever been used for your kindness, if you've been left behind because your loyalty ran deeper than theirs, if you've always been the one to apologize first, to wait, to forgive, then it's time to draw the line. From this moment forward, tell yourself, I will no longer love the same way. And if these words stir something inside you, if a part of you finally feels like it's had enough of the pain that comes from caring too much, then hit like. Not for me, for you. It's a signal that the older, softer version of you is finished. It's that version who mistook vulnerability for love, who believed that being good was enough. And if you're ready to make that evolution permanent, subscribe. Not because you need more words, but because you're ready to become someone the world can't break. Not because you need more content, but because you're building a new kind of man, the kind who protects his heart with a plan. This isn't just a video, it's a turning point. A mirror held to the version of yourself you've outgrown. This is a wake-up call Machiavelli issued centuries ago. A warning buried in time, yet more relevant than ever. In a world that profits from your softness, a man without strategy will be consumed, piece by piece, by the very love he gives away to, easily. And it never begins with an explosion. She started small. A sigh that lingered just a little too long. A reply that came hours later than usual. A look that once meant I see you completely, now vague, like fog spreading across a mirror. But you didn't catch it. Because when you love someone deeply, you don't always see them for who they are. You see who you hope they are. You project. You decorate their silence with stories of optimism. You forgive patterns you should be interrogating just to keep the dream alive. It's not the truth you're after. It's comfort. And that's the first cost of love without strategy. It doesn't just blind you to betrayal. It blinds you to transformation. To the slow, quiet ways things fall apart. Machiavelli understood this. With chilling precision, he who builds his defense on love alone builds on sand. Because when you lead with love alone, you give the other person quiet control, the power to change the rules, to move the goalposts, and never tell you that the game has changed. And slowly, without realizing it, You stop calculating. You stop protecting your position. Stop watching the board. While you're wrapped in kindness, they're making their moves. They test boundaries. They begin to see your forgiveness as automatic, your presence as a given, your patience as bottomless. So they press further. They start arriving late. They stop expressing gratitude. They raise their voice when you ask for space. Not out of hate, but because they can. That's the Machiavellian principle. Familiarity doesn't breed love, it breeds entitlement. The more access they have to you without cost, the less they value what they've been given.
Ow.
Over time, you don't feel like they're Miraculou. Feel like they're fallback. It's not because they're cruel, because you never asked them to earn you. And if any of this resonated, if these words helped you name what you've always felt but couldn't articulate, consider leaving a super thanks below. It's more than support. It's your way of keeping this message alive. It's helping this team continue to bring you content crafted with precision, purpose, and power. From the heart, thank you for standing with us. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you stayed silent just to avoid a fight? The last time you whispered it's not worth it, when deep down it absolutely was? When did you last apologize, not because you were wrong, but because you feared losing them? Now turn the question around. How often did they do the same for you? That's not love. That's erosion. This is self-abandonment, wearing a tuxedo. And that is what Machiavelli feared more than enemies. Not swords, not sabotage. Blind loyalty. Because betrayal doesn't need to break down your door. It just needs you to stop locking it. And love, when left unchecked, will make you throw away the key. That's exactly why you need structure, boundaries, terms, even in love. You must be the kind of man who can look directly into the eyes of someone he adores, someone he would do almost anything for, and still be able to say, I will not let you harm me, and stay. Because unconditional love might sound poetic in novels and films, but in the real world, it turns kings into servants. Machiavelli never said to stop loving. He said to stop loving blindly, to stop handing out swords to people simply because they make you feel seen, heard, or needed. He warned us to stop bleeding for anyone who flinches at the sight of your boundaries. Because love, without discipline, is not virtue. And love, without the ability to say no, is not strength. So the next time someone says you're being cold for enforcing a boundary, remember this. They're not grieving the absence of love. They're grieving the death of their control over you. And in that moment, you reclaim your power not through anger, not through revenge, but through clarity. That is the Machiavellian way. To love not like a child who hopes blindly, but like a man who sees clearly you thought you were doing the right thing, that being open meant you were courageous, that your patience was wisdom, that being the first to forgive made you enlightened. But here's what no one told you. You weren't leading. You were draining, not by blood, but in quiet, invisible ways. Like every time you silenced your own voice just to avoid another storm. Like every time you stepped into a room and left vital pieces of yourself at the door just to keep the peace. Every compromise. Every truth you swallowed. Every moment you looked away from what you should have faced head on. Machiavelli would have seen it immediately. He would have said, emotion is the leash they use to drag your power behind their pleasure. Because what looks like virtue on the surface, kindness, patience, softness, often becomes a slow erosion of self underneath. You entered life holding your soul like a delicate object, whispering, please handle with care. They didn't. Not because they were monsters, but because they knew you'd always come back. You'd explain yourself. You'd make peace even when you didn't start the war. You believed your silence was strength, but silence without consequence becomes permission. And in a Machiavellian world, permission, especially when unspoken, is strategy. So they stopped respecting your retreat. They stopped earning your presence. Why? Because they had already mapped your patterns. You forgive without needing to be asked. You stay by instinct. You give endlessly without checking if you're being given to in return. And once that pattern is known, once your giving becomes predictable, they stop treasuring it. They start collecting what you offer, like a resource they never had to earn. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you kept quiet just to avoid an argument? The last time you swallowed your truth and said sorry, not because you were wrong, but because you feared they'd walk away if you didn't. Now pause and ask yourself this. How often have they done the same for you? How many times have they sacrificed their pride to preserve your peace? This isn't love. It's quiet disintegration, a slow unraveling of your self-worth disguised as loyalty. It's the erosion of your voice under the weight of one-sided sacrifice. And that's what Machiavelli feared more than enemies. Not those who strike with swords, but devotion that sees nothing clearly. Because betrayal doesn't always come with a bang. It doesn't need to smash your door down. Sometimes, it just needs you to stop locking it. And when love goes unchecked without boundaries or balance, it can make you forget where the door even was. You stop protecting your peace. You start letting things slide. That's why you need structure, boundaries, terms, even in love especially. In love, you must become the kind of man who can gaze into the eyes of someone he cherishes deeply and still say, I will not let you harm me, and stay. Because unconditional love may sound poetic in novels, but in reality, it often turns leaders into laborers, kings into servants. Machiavelli never told us to stop loving, but he did warn us to stop loving blindly, to stop placing swords in the hands of those who merely made you feel seen, to stop bleeding for people who recoil the moment you assert a boundary. Because love without discipline is not virtue, and love that cannot say no is not strength. So the next time someone calls you cold for having limits, remember they are not mourning your affection. They're mourning the death of their control. And in that precise moment, you reclaim your power. Not by shouting, not through spite, but through precision, through strategy. That is the Machiavellian way, to love like a man who sees with clarity. Not like a child who hopes blindly and gives without caution. But it doesn't happen all at once. You don't just wake up one day and hand over your power in a single gesture. It begins in moments so quiet, so subtle, you hardly notice the game has changed. It starts when you say yes to something your heart clearly said no to. When you bite your tongue even though your soul is begging you to speak. You forgive long before any apology even arrives, and in those moments, you whisper to yourself, I'm just being the bigger person. But Machiavelli would call it by its real name, man's strategic surrender. Because here's the truth, no one wants to admit, the moment you stop enforcing your boundaries, the game doesn't end. It simply shifts them. They start winning, not because they're smarter, not because they're stronger, but because they're the only ones still moving their pieces. You think you're keeping the peace? That you're avoiding unnecessary conflict? But silence in this context, it isn't peace, it's a vacuum. And vacuums never stay empty. They get filled, often by force. Your absence of resistance becomes their roadmap. They test your patience, and they test your self-worth. Slowly, they begin to rewrite the rules of your relationship without ever asking for your permission. You used to speak up, used to walk away when respect wasn't served, used to draw the line. But now, you hesitate, you explain, you soften the blow. You begin to whisper things to yourself like, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe they didn't mean it like that. Maybe I just need to be more understanding. No, you don't need more understanding. You need your spine back. Because time doesn't heal, disrespect it cements it. Every time you let it slide, every time you swallow the discomfort and pretend, it didn't matter. You're not avoiding a problem. You're laying bricks. One by one, you're building the walls of a prison one where you are the inmate, and they hold the key. Machiavelli warned us about this dynamic with brutal clarity. If your forgiveness is predictable, it will be used long before it is ever appreciated. Let that truth carve itself into your bones, because chances are, you've been taught something else, haven't you? You were told that love keeps no record, that real love doesn't keep score, that good people always give others the benefit of the doubt. But let me ask you, what king survives without a ledger? What general leads his army without tracking? The cost of war? You've been trained to let guilt replace logic, to let emotion overrule reason. And each time you choose comfort over clarity, you pay for it. Not in fire or fury, but in slow, invisible erosion the silent erasing of your sense of self. Meanwhile, they collect. They collect your time, your silence, your availability, your unwavering presence. And they never pay even a whisper of gratitude. Until one day, finally, you say no. And just like that, sure, the villain. You're cold. You've changed. Of course you have. Growth always offends the ones who benefited most from your stagnation. If these words speak directly to the life you've lived and if you believe more men deserve to hear truths that are rarely spoken out loud, you can support this mission. A simple gesture, like a super thanks below, helps us continue delivering work that cuts deeper, hits harder, and tells the stories no one else dares to touch. If you've already supported, thank you. You are the reason we can keep raising the standard, because they may say they miss you. But it's not really you they miss. The version of you that made their life easier by making yours smaller. But Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He wrote, "The man who is feared for his firmness will be respected long after the kind man is forgotten." You don't need to be feared like a tyrant. You don't need to rule with cruelty. You need to be respected like a man who means what he says. A man who follows through. A man whose consistency builds a fortress, not just for protection, but for peace. Because consistency is power, and power, it's not something you negotiate. It's something you either hold or you lose. So stop apologizing for the walls you've built after years of being walked over. Those walls aren't bitterness. They aren't vengeance. They're clarity. They don't say go away. They say you can still knock. But you will not enter unless you've earned the right. Because once people stop fearing consequences, they stop filtering their behavior. And when there's no filter, there's no bottom. They begin to expect forgiveness without change, loyalty without reciprocity, access without qualification. And when you finally decide to pull back, when you protect your energy and reclaim your dignity, they won't call it correction, they'll call it betrayal. But let's be honest there. Not mourning your love. They're mourning the loss of their advantage. The free emotional labor. The comforting silence. The man who didn't know how to say no. But that man, he's gone now. You don't beg. You don't chase. You don't explain. You return to thee. Bored with strategy in your hands and clarity in your eyes. Not with rage, but with rules. Let them talk. Let them whine. Let them say you've changed. Because the truth is, you're no longer here to be emotionally available on demand. Not a vending machine for comfort. You're here to be in control and command of your emotional availability. The game never stopped. You just stepped back momentarily. But now, with calm precision, you pick up your pieces. You study the board. You reposition your strategy. And you remind them you were never the piece. You were always the player. Told you to keep the peace. They told you to avoid conflict, to stay agreeable, to smile through discomfort, and to let things slide all in the name of harmony. But did they ever tell you what that supposed peace would cost you? They didn't. They never warned you that the price would be paid with your spine, your voice, your identity. Because what they called peace wasn't peace at all. It was submission slow. Suffocating submission. It was your boundaries being eroded one silence at a time. It was your standards being buried beneath the weight of just let it go. And you, noble in your intentions, believed you were strong for swallowing your truth. You thought kindness meant forgiveness, even for the wounds that kept reopening. You thought walking away, staying silent, letting it pass, that these were signs of wisdom. But Machiavelli would shake his head not in contempt, but in understanding. Not because you were weak, but because he saw what happens when a man trades clarity for comfort. When he offers peace without requiring respect, there is no peace where respect is absent. There is no loyalty where fear is forgotten. You stayed quiet when they belittled your needs. You forgave betrayal not because it was earned, but because you couldn't bear the tension of conflict. You smiled while bleeding. You performed strength while being drained. And what did it earn you? Seat at a table where everyone eats from your plate, yet no one asks if you're still hungry? You became the strong one, the nice one, the reliable one, the man they could lean on, vent to. take from and return to only when it suited them. And the exact moment you said enough, everything changed. Suddenly their eyes widened, their egos bruised. You've changed. So cold now. What happened to you? Well, let's tell the truth. You didn't change. You just stopped sacrificing yourself for their comfort. And if that makes them uneasy, let them feel it. Let them sit in the tension they used to escape by drowning you in guilt. Because the so-called peace you were protecting was never yours. It was their comfort, built on your compliance. Their ease, created by the slow erasure of your needs. They didn't love you. They loved the version of you that tolerated everything and asked for nothing. And now, if that version is gone, so yes, they'll call you distant. Yes, they'll say you've grown harsh. Yes, they'll insist you're not who you used to be. Good, because the man you used to be. He was dying behind a forced smile. He was burning inside just to keep others warm. And you thought that was love. You thought that was virtue. You wore your suffering like a badge of honor. But what if love isn't always gentle? What if real loves self? Strong love draws a line and dares the world not to cross it. If strength isn't in how long you can endure, but in how clearly you can say, this is where it stops, then perhaps it's time to ask yourself, have you mistaken endurance for virtue? This is not bitterness. This is not spite. This is boundaries. And boundaries are what distinguish men who are respected from men who are simply remembered for always being available, for always saying yes. Availability without discernment doesn't make you noble, it makes you expendable. So let me ask you something, and don't answer too quickly. Sit with it. Let it cut deep. How many times have you apologized for making someone else uncomfortable? Just because you finally honored your own truth? How many times have you softened your voice, diluted your needs, or stepped back from the edge of confrontation because somewhere along the way you were taught that peace is always preferable? And in the end, what did that peace buy you? Did it earn their respect? Did it change their behavior? They finally see the weight you were carrying? Did they appreciate the piece of yourself you kept breaking just to keep everything calm? Or did they just keep taking and calling it normal? Because if the only way to maintain peace is to quietly go to war with yourself, then it's not peace at all. It's performance. And like any performance, it can only last so long before something inside you snaps. This is your breaking point. From this moment forward, let your peace be expensive. Let it be rare, earned, and sacred. Not something given freely to those who haven't proven they deserve it. Let your love be filtered through the lens of discernment. Let your silence be a choice, not an expectation. Let it be, and not assumed, because those who genuinely care for you will not fear your clarity. They will lean into it. They won't run from the standards you finally embraced. They won't try to guilt you for growing. They won't mourn the loss of the version of you who made their life easier by allowing yours to slowly fall apart. So, let them go. Let them leave. Let them whisper. Let them say, you've changed. Because you have, and you should be proud of that. From now on, you won't confuse stillness with safety. You won't confuse compliance with connection. You won't confuse patience with purpose. You're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be authentic. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself. So go ahead, draw your lines. Speak your truth without trembling, and watch carefully. Observe who gets uncomfortable when you stop shrinking to make room for their comfort. Because the ones who disappear, they were never truly in love with you. They were in love with their power over you, and now that power is gone because this man is the one standing in your shoes today's no longer afraid of conflict. He's no longer seeking approval. He's no longer patching a sinking ship with silence and smiles. He has drawn the line. And behind that line, there is peace, real peace. Not just the absence of noise or conflict, but the kind of peace that demands nothing of you that you weren't meant to give. They told you to love unconditionally, to keep showing up, to keep forgiving, cued, giving even when it hurt. But no one warned you what would happen when people begin treating that kind of love like unexpected, unmeasured, free, Because what's always accessible eventually becomes invisible, and what's never protected always gets abused. You weren't loving, you were leaking. You were pouring pieces of yourself into places that never planned to hold you. You were bleeding into hands that never intended to carry you. In Machiavelli, he saw it exactly for what it was. He didn't tell men to stop loving. He wasn't that cynical. He told them to structure their love, to wrap it in scaffolding, to surround it with architecture, to protect it with precision. Because love without boundaries isn't love, it's exposure. It's vulnerability masquerading as connection. Exposed man? He is the easiest to bend, to twist, to drain, and discard. So let me ask you, and answer truthfully, how many times have you apologized just to stop someone else's emotional meltdown? How many times have you softened, stepped back, bit your tongue not because you were wrong, but because their voice got louder? How often did you surrender, not out of love, but because being called cold stung worse than being disrespected? Not love. That's not connection. That's emotional pressure repackaged as intimacy. It's manipulation, cloaked in the language of closeness. It's dependency, dressed up as devotion. You were the constant one, the steady one, reliable, always available, so always showing up, always listening. But the moment the weight shifted, the moment it was your turn to need, they hesitated. Stalled, they vanished. They treated your pain like it came with a receipt or something they could return or delay, as if your suffering required justification. And when you finally said no, when that soft rebellion escaped your lips like a spark, they panicked. Not because they missed you, because they lost their most powerful tool, your emotional compliance. Machiavelli would have seen it immediately. He knew that when your loyalty becomes predictable, it will be exploited before it is appreciated. So, what do you do now? You don't stop loving. You sharpen the edge. You don't shut down. You build the filter. You refine your love not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You love through standards. You love through structure. You love through clarity, not to harm, but to define. To remind the world that your heart is not a public service. It is a vault. And only those with the code deserve to step inside. Love that can't say no isn't love, it's servitude. Your warmth must be invited, not assumed. Your time must be earned, not expected. Your loyalty is not a default setting. It is a privilege. And when that loyalty is tested, you don't. B-E-G. You don't argue. You don't explain. You observe. Watch what happens when you say, "This is where it ends." Do they retreat in respect? Or do they try to bulldoze their way across your boundary, only louder, only angrier? Because those who lash out when you draw the line, they're not looking for love. They're looking for control. The version of you who never questioned wait, he carried that man is gone. He slipped away quietly, didn't he? Somewhere between the nights you waited for that text that never came, and the mornings you told yourself it didn't matter, he disappeared the moment you realized that your loyalty was costing you your sanity. You're not here to be infinite. You're not here to be absorbent. You're not here to be the soft place someone lands after disrespecting your boundaries. You're not a sponge for pain. You're a man with a threshold. Not a wall, no, but a gate. And not everyone gets through. Because love without entry requirements becomes survival without recognition. And make no mistake, this is not cruelty. This is curation. This is choosing who gets access to the most sacred parts of you. And curation is clarity. Clarity at its core is love for yourself. Finally, firmly, and unapologetically. It's not arrogance. It's not distance. Direction. So when they call you cold or distant, don't flinch. Just nod. When they say you've changed, don't defend. Just agree. Because what they're truly mourning isn't your affection. It's not the warmth of your presence or the kindness of your heart. What they're mourning is the version of you who never made them earn it. The man who gave everything, even when nothing was returned. That version, he's gone quietly for good. What remains is a man who still loves, yes, deeply, but no longer blindly. A man who gives, but only through discernment. It's not surrender. They told you to love without fear, to give without limits, to forgive instantly, to trust without hesitation. They called that strength. He said, that's what makes a man good, admirable, even worthy. But Machiavelli would have laughed on out of cruelty, not out of bitterness, but because he understood something far deeper. He knew this. Fearless love isn't noble, it's naive. Because real strength, the kind that survives storms and stands unmoved in fire, is never blind. It's never fearless. It knows when to bend and when to stand. You've been sold a dream, haven't you? A dangerous one? A doctrine wrapped in poetry, soaked in guilt, and sweetened with the promise of peace. Be soft, always return, never withhold your heart. And you obeyed. You said yes when everything inside you was screaming no. You stayed long after your soul had begun to unravel, kept showing up, even when your spirit limped through the door. They praised you for it. They told you that's what love looks like. But here's what Machiavelli knew and what no one ever told you. When a man loves without fear, he becomes easy to control. He becomes soft clay in unworthy hands. He becomes obedient, pliable, and worst of all, predictable. And in a world ruled by perception and power, predictability is death. So ask yourself, how many times have you betrayed your own instincts just to be understood? How many times have you silenced your standards to keep the peace? How often have you swallowed your truth because you were afraid of being labeled difficult, toxic, selfish? That's not love. That's emotional propaganda. It's a system, one built specifically to keep good men in cages crafted from their own guilt. Because when you love without fear, you forget to protect yourself. You give so much that you vanish. And when you finally disappear into your giving, they don't stop you. They don't pull you back. No, they applaud. Until you're no longer a man. You're a resource, a function. Faucet they turn on when they're thirsty and turn off when they're full. And when you finally run dry. They don't grieve. They don't mourn. They just refill elsewhere. Fearless love doesn't make you stronger. It makes you disposable. Machiavelli saw this not just in theory, but in history. Kings who couldn't walk away were slaughtered. Generals who fought for loyalty without leverage were betrayed. Men who worshipped instead of ruled were erased. Because when you give your heart without guardrails, without standards, without consequence, you're not offering love. You're offering power, and power given freely never ends well. So here's the truth. No one dares speak. You're supposed to be afraid. Afraid of loving the wrong person too long. Afraid of betraying your deepest values just for the illusion of validation. Afraid of becoming that kind of man who gives so much that he eventually forgets what it feels like to receive. That fear, it's not weakness, it's instinct. It's your inner compass trying to protect what little remains of your self-worth. And the real danger? It begins when you ignore it. Because what good is being held at night if to stay there, you have to bury your dignity beneath the sheets? What good is being loved if that love only survives by requiring the death of your spine? Real love, true, lasting, powerful love is not fearless. It doesn't demand that you give without pause or surrender without thought. It's watchful. It's measured. It's earned. It protects just as fiercely as it gives. So if they call you cold for having standards, if they label you distant for enforcing your worth, if they say you're hard to love because you refuse to kneel, let them. You are not here to be worshipped. You're not here to prove how soft or endlessly forgiving you can be. You're here to build something unshakable. Not just connection, but certainty. Not just romance, but respect. And if that means you walk alone for a season, then walk like a king. Because Machiavelli would have whispered this in your ear. Is the throne you're building in her heart worth the crown you're burning on your own head? So no, you don't need to love fearlessly, but you need to love wisely. With caution. With clarity. With consequences. You need to be the kind of man who says, yes, I will give you my heart, but I will never give you the power to break it without cost. That's not cold. That's calculated. And in a world that feeds off soft, pliable men, calculation is survival. This is it. It's the final breath of the man you used to be, the one who led with emotion, the one who wanted to be liked more than he wanted to be respected, the one who believed that being good was enough. He's gone because he was never leading. He was leaking patience, leaking forgiveness, leaking his own identity, piece by piece, in exchange for brief moments of approval. and no one came to save him. No one looked him in the eyes and said, "You're giving too much. You're breaking behind that smile. You're fading." No, they clapped. They called him strong, empathetic, reliable. They used him and called it love, and he kept showing up until there was nothing left to show. But you are not that man anymore, because now you understand something Machiavelli knew centuries ago. Power doesn't belong to the kindest man in the room. It belongs to the most calculated one, the man who knows exactly what he allows, exactly when he withdraws, exactly where he draws the line, and never explains why. That's authority. And this is the shift. You stop justifying your standards. You stop apologizing for your silence. You stop defending your distance. You don't yell. You disappear. Not out of pettiness, but out of principle. Because the man who moves in silence doesn't just inspire curiosity. He commands fear. Your line, you don't negotiate it. You don't plead or beg. Instead, you let your absence teach the lesson your words never could. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than any explanation. When they ask, "Why are you acting different?" you simply say, "I've recalibrated." That's it. No over-explaining, no defending, no guilt. Authority doesn't waste time explaining. It acts. And here lies your final transformation from the man who desperately sought to be heard to the man who was heard without saying a word. From the man who reacted emotionally to the man who responds with cold, calculated strategy. From the man who gave too much, too fast, to the man who now watches closely, who earns access carefully, and filters out what isn't worthy. Every boundary you set from now on is not an invitation for debate or negotiation. It is a threshold, a firm line in the sand. Those who truly belong will rise to meet it. The rest will fade away, and you will not chase them. Because chasing is the game of emotional men. You are no longer ruled by fleeting emotions. You are precise, exact. You no longer define yourself by how much you endure, but by what you refuse to tolerate. You don't demand apologies, you demand alignment. You don't plead for understanding, you reward growth. Your presence becomes rare, valuable, expensive. Your care is conditional, out of cruelty, but out of respect for your own worth. Because what is sacred must be guarded fiercely, or it will be gutted and lost. Machiavelli didn't preach cruelty. No, he preached restraint, precision, and strategic silence. He didn't burn bridges recklessly. Instead, he watched carefully who was willing to swim across the moat when the gates refused to open. And now, you build your own moat. You raise your standards higher than ever before. You rebuild the kingdom of your peace not with wishful thinking or hope, but with solid bricks of boundaries and conviction. With boundaries, not blind trust. And when they say you've changed, you smile knowingly because that was always the point. You are no longer the man who gave everything away just to be chosen. You are the man who finally chose himself. From this moment on, every move you make is no longer a reaction. It is a signal, a declaration that you have arrived, but you will no longer be ignored. So now you see clearly. It was never about love. It was obedience disguised as affection. It was never peace. Was your silence repackaged as virtue? It was never respected. It was about how much of yourself you were willing to sacrifice just to be allowed inside the room. You gave everything, your presence, your forgiveness, your fire, and in return they misunderstood you. They took you for granted. They called you safe because you made them feel powerful. But the man they once knew, the one who bled quietly, who smiled through betrayal, who stood patiently at the door waiting to be chosen, he's gone. He's not coming back. Because this version of you doesn't beg to be seen, commands attention without asking for it. This version doesn't need to prove his worth to anyone he loves with structure, with standards, with sovereignty. He loves deliberately, with intention, not blindly. This version doesn't ask for peace. He builds it, guards it fiercely. It burns the bridges of anyone who confuses kindness for weakness. So don't explain yourself. Don't justify your choices. Don't look back with regret or doubt. Let them say you've changed, because what they never loved was the real you. They loved the version of you who kept breaking so they could stay comfortable, who gave without limits and begged without dignity. But that version is dead. What stands in his place now is a man of presence, of unshakable boundaries, of quiet command. If something inside you shifted today, if you felt your ribs crack open and your fire return, don't ignore it. That wasn't just a video. That was your resurrection, your rebirth. So press like not for me, but for you as a declaration. A funeral for the old you. A signal to yourself that you are no longer available to be disrespected or diminished. And if you're ready to stay on this path, to keep building this new life, hit subscribe. Not because you need another video, but because you're creating a life where every word you hear reminds you of the man you were born to become, the man you are becoming every day. This isn't motivation, it's memory. This isn't mere inspiration, it's a warning. You were not born simply to be loved. You were born to master how love is given, how it is earned, how it must be protected. So say it with me now. I am no longer the one who waits. I am the one who sets the terms. You either become cold-blooded, disciplined, calm, and unbreakable, or you keep bleeding, smiling through the pain, calling it love. The choice is yours. But if you're still here, I already know what you've chosen. Welcome back. Welcome forward. Your command has begun. And to those who've supported us with a super thanks, thank you for standing with this movement. It matters. Every voice counts. Every step forward counts. We try because together we rise.